Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing great conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I'm also an investor in and advisor to more than 30 AI-first companies. And as you know, a firm believer in the power of technology to make humans better. If you're passionate about changing the world with AI, or maybe just looking for your next adventure, let's talk. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show, and the added bonus is you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact. This week in Nature Online, Chris Stokel-Walker writes about how ChatGPT is listed as an author on recent research papers, and how the scientific community has responded. Many in the field say AIs, such as ChatGPT, don't fulfill the criteria for a study author because they can't take responsibility for the content and the integrity of scientific papers. An attribution of authorship carries with it accountability for the work, which can't be effectively applied to LLMs. And that's a quote from Magdalena Skipper, who's the editor-in-chief of Nature based out of London. Authors using LLMs in any way while developing a paper should document their use in the methods or acknowledgement sections when that's appropriate. Scientific director Stein Sigurdsson, an astronomer at Pennsylvania State University in University Park, says a software tool can't be an author of a submission, in part because it can't consent to terms of use and the rights to distribute the content it generates. One guideline is that a co-author needs to make a significant scholarly contribution to the article, which might be possible with tools such as ChatGPT, but it must also have the capacity to agree to be a co-author and to take responsibility for the study's content. Of course, we'll continue discussing this very important topic about generative AI, ChatGPT, LLMs, and certainly the ethics related to them in future episodes. But now shifting to this week's conversation. We've all become closet supply chain experts since the pandemic as prices for high demand goods have surged, ships have backed up at ports, and iPhones in cars can't be produced due to chip shortages. Bob Rogers started Oii.ai in 2019 to automate supply chain design. The company uses advanced modeling and AI to optimize supply chain planning and automate the configuration of complex networks. Bob started his career as a Harvard physicist, using neural networks to measure activity near black holes in deep space. During his 35-year career, Bob has been a trailblazer in using AI to solve complex problems. He's an expert in residence for AI at the UCSF Smarter Health Center and was chief data scientist in the data center group at Intel. He also was a co-founder and chief scientist at Apixio, a healthcare AI company. Additionally, he co-authored the books Artificial Neural Networks, Forecasting Time Series, and De-mystifying Big Data and Machine Learning for Healthcare. Bob received his BA in physics at Cal Berkeley and his PhD in physics at Harvard. And it's quite a distinguished background. Without further ado, Bob, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by maybe having you share a little bit more about your background and how you got into this space.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, I'm really excited to be here. The starting point for me, you mentioned I have a background in physics, was working on computational models of supermassive black holes in other galaxies. And what that led me to was realizing early on, so for me early on, the mid 80s, that solving complex problems with computers is something that you could do then, and it was only going to get bigger, faster, smarter. One of the things that cropped up early on that really captured my my imagination was these artificial neural networks, which were the idea that you could compute using the way the brain computes rather than more traditional rules-based computing. And so that led to quite a lot of work for me early on. One thing that happened was people wanted to know, can you forecast the stock market with these neural nets? And so I actually had a 12 year period where I co-founded and ran a quantitative futures hedge fund using different kinds of modeling to forecast. And it actually did work quite well. The fast forwarding, as you know, most of your listeners know, there was an AI winner from sort of the early 90s until about 2006. So I was working in a variety of areas to create value around data, but as the technology to use what artificial neural networks became, that is deep learning convolutional neural networks for image processing, as that started to come of age, it corresponded nicely with the kinds of things I was solving at Apixio and then later at Intel. So it was really sort of, it's been this interest in how you can compute more the way a brain computes has been there the whole time. And I've been using little bits and pieces. And then as the technology really flourished, I was in some ways swept along with the tide. So it's been quite an interesting journey as the technology has it has clearly hit the hockey stick. I mean, we're talking about things today that we wouldn't have even talked about 4 or 5 months ago. And so it's a very exciting time.
We're talking about the hockey stick. So I mentioned in the opener the AI fun fact was about AI, or specifically ChatGPT, being listed as a co-author. And who better to discuss that than someone who just collaborated with ChatGPT as a co-author to publish a book called The Evolution of Creativity and Communication. What surprised you most about your co-author?
Thanks, Dan. So the part that really amazed me as I was working with ChatGPT, and I can tell you a little bit about how the book came about as well, but it was really its ability to tell a story and to sort of pick a voice and also to incorporate humor. So one of the sort of byline of the book, or the second part of the title, is ChatGPT, an AI expert, and a lawyer walk into a bar. So, of course, I'm the AI expert. The lawyer is actually my wife, Teresa Hart, who is an attorney and who was very interested in really putting the pressure on ChatGPT to answer questions about ethics and bias and intellectual property rights. But amusingly, we started with that idea that the three of us were working together, and we posed that as a question to ChatGPT. Can you write a joke with that theme? And actually, the very first section of the book is this fairly amusing joke that ChatGPT wrote to the theme of ChatGPT, an AI expert, and a lawyer walk into a bar. So that ability to capture humor, which I think is quite nuanced, and the ability to sort of pick a voice and tell a story from that perspective was actually quite surprising to me.
When ChatGPT has what we'd say looks like human insights, it seems brilliant, and it seems like magic. And then it also frequently spews nonsense.
Correct.
How do you, given your experience co-authoring a book with your wife and ChatGPT, how do you think about the dangers when it's flawed versus the benefits when it seems to generate insights?
Yeah. So the flow of being able to write large amounts of content with, you can ask it to write content 3 or 4 different times and get completely different ways of telling the story, different perspectives, not so much driving to different points, but reporting information or reporting the story in different ways is actually quite powerful. But the challenge is ChatGPT doesn't actually know anything. What it's reporting back to us is how words in the history of human communication have connected together in the past, and with a very sensitive awareness of context. And so the challenge is you can say things that sound incredibly plausible because those words can all logically connect together, but it's it's either not true or it's nonsensical or something. So one of the conclusions in the book is you got to fact check. You got to fact check everything that ChatGPT or any of these, generative tools would generate. In the meantime, if you're looking for creative ways to try communicating something, the shape and the flow of that language is actually extremely handy to have. I mean, that's beautiful. I will also say, as a CEO of Oii, knowing that we can run a piece of text through ChatGPT and ensure that it's clear, and that, even if someone has written content, outgoing content to, the marketplace, whether it's a social media post or a press release, being able to run it through and check for punctuation and grammar and clarity, and even get suggestions on how to improve how to say something, that takes a lot of oversight pressure off of me, which is fantastic.
So this may be a better question for your wife, but ChatGPT is essentially generating content that was previously produced and amalgamating it together from, like you said, the history of time, everything, all kinds of written communication. And you're then using, some variations of this amalgamated content, and you're republishing it in the form of a book without attribution, not because you have any ill intention, but because you don't know where to attribute to whom to attribute the content. Talk me through kind of the ethics, and as an author, how you think through commercializing content that you get from ChatGPT.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and it's a bit of a conundrum at the moment. But again, it kind of comes down to fact checking. Although, from a text point of view, one of the things I did was I put in, when there was an interesting turn of phrase, I would put that into the internet into a Google search, and look to see whether that would come up as part of some other piece of content. I actually didn't find any places where an actual phrase had been sort of pulled completely out of previously written stuff. I did a little bit of that because, interestingly, we also generated the illustrations for the book using generative AI. And so I did a little bit of image searching to see if I could find similar images. And, at the end of the day, it's interesting. What these systems do is they break all this content and the connections between words and images, and between words and context, breaks them down into tiny, tiny little pieces, and then figures out what are the patterns that those things are normally assembled in. So it's really rarely taking a chunk of an image or a chunk of a piece of text. However, that gets you so far in saying, okay, well, so most times we can see where we're doing more what we do as humans, which is we're taking past human knowledge, re-assimilating it into a set of processes that we can use for generating something, and then using it. We don't need to go back to past humans to attribute what we're saying or what we're doing on a daily basis, because we're using such tiny granular pieces. It does get tricky, though, because, for instance, for the image generation, you can say, in the style of, anime in the style of Ghibli Studios. Well, that starts to feel like, you're going beyond assimilating little, fragments of human knowledge and really into, well, this is a style and a theme. There's something coherent about this that was truly the creative output of another person or group of people. So it's definitely not black and white. And one of the things in the book, just from a practical point of view, we took out all the prompts where there was some sort of suggestion of, like, use a Ghibli Studios animation style. We went back to very bare, show me a photorealistic image of, a ChatGPT, a lawyer and an AI expert in a bar, right? Rather than trying to theme it after somebody's sort of copyrighted work. So it is it is going to probably, some of it is going to be tested out in the courts, but it is less. I found that it was harder to plagiarize than I was afraid it would be, when I started. But that was one of the questions, can I rely on this content to not get me into trouble?
Like you said, I think a lot of this is going to be adjudicated in the courts in 2023. I mean, it's happening in real time.
Yeah.
And I think that might be the topic of your next book. You did a really good job of navigating the ethics, but I think there's a lot that,
Thank you.
People need to be educated about how to tread lightly.
Yeah. It's interesting. I published a book in 2022 called Demystifying AI for the Enterprise. And I bring it up because actually writing the chapter on supply chain is what led to the formation of Oii.ai in the first place. But as I thought about what would the next book in that series be, it's demystifying ethics and the impact on humanity of AI, right? This is definitely where we are right now, trying to figure things out. In fact, I saw a very interesting panel discussion between Fei Li, who is one of the great visionaries of modern AI, and Mira Murati, who is the CTO at OpenAI, and they were talking about just these topics, and that was it was a very tactical conversation, which was actually refreshing, not this sort of, oh, well, we've got to worry about this and that. It was like, we're doing this to protect against this. We're doing this to protect against this. Very interesting conversation that you can find online.
If you have a link, send me it and I'll link to it in the show notes.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely do that.
That sounds fascinating. Those are certainly two luminaries.
Oh, absolutely.
So in the past few months since the introduction or the commercial introduction of ChatGPT, it's just captured the popular zeitgeist, like almost no technology we've seen in the past 20 or 30 years. And yet the combination of using conversational AI to produce content or using conversational text prompts to generate images, in some ways you could argue they're incremental improvements on top of things that have existed for a while. What is it about the introduction of ChatGPT that just captured the public imagination?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is that the sort of humanness of the responses feels like a step function from previous technology. I mean, everyone's had the experience of using a chat assistant in customer service and being extremely annoyed. I already told you that I'm not calling about new accounts. I'm calling about when you interact with ChatGPT, it seems to just get it right every time. Like there's just this flow and this sense that it is actually understanding. I think there's something else interesting about ChatGPT, and I comment on this in the book, but it's a very friendly, polite young person that I'm interacting with, and I would be comfortable having my parents, who are 88 and 91, use ChatGPT, and they would be very comfortable interacting with it. That's also kind of a step function. It does lead to some of the other topics we could talk about around bias and risk, but that sort of very friendly interface. The third thing that sort of has, I think, really made an impact is, I was talking to someone the other day who said that they had been actually using it to study for exams. And even though they had most of the raw material there, because they were having a conversation, they felt like they were being taught. It was like the teacher was there feeding them the information in a very human-friendly way. I think humans like that. It's really resonated from that point of view as well.
So within the last 6 months on this show, we talked a lot about Google's Lambda LLM, large language model, and an engineer named Blake Lemoine, who now famously claimed it was sentient. And at that time, all of the conversation was around whether or not a bot could be sentient. And it triggered a lot of decades old fears about the bot apocalypse and the bot overlords. Very different conversation. Unbelievably, it was like 3 months later when all of a sudden, we couldn't stop talking about, how friendly ChatGPT is and how it opens up a whole world of new possibilities for content creators. What changed in like 3 months that all of a sudden we were ready to embrace the bots?
I think it has a lot to do with just that friendliness. And and if you listen to YouTube that I was referencing earlier between Fei Li and Mira Murati, OpenAI put a lot of work into using reinforcement learning to train ChatGPT to be nice, to be friendly, to not say or do bad things. And it feels very reassuring. I think that the bottom line is all the risks are still lurking under there, or the ones that are realistic. Not all the apocalyptic fears are realistic, by the way, but the things that we should be paying attention to. I mean, we wrote the book because we wanted people to be able to see, not speculate, but see what the technology can do and sort of walk through like how it works. There's those fears are to be paid attention to right now, but that interface, that friendly, nice interface, has had a big impact on people's perception about what it is they're dealing with. I think it's kind of a stroke of genius that they put that layer on top. I mean, GPT-3 is incredibly powerful, and when you talk about prompt engineering and some of the things that are the technologies that are being built around that, it's less constrained and more unbelievably like industry and work impactful. But ChatGPT is nice, and we like that.
So here's a conundrum that I have, and I want to, as an AI expert, I want your opinion on it. So concern I have is that as more and more writers kind of somewhat, this is not in your situation, but I'll use the adjective lazily rely on these LLMs. Do we risk that kind of all content will become homogenized? It's kind of this reversion to the mean, because the LLMs are trained on, in the case of ChatGPT, the 2021 Common Crawl. So it feels like it's raising up the quality of some content, but eventually everything's going to start to seem the same.
And no, it's an absolutely valid concern. In fact, the way we structured the book, we had ChatGPT write every single bit without editorial changes for the entire book until the last chapter, where we wrote, here's what we did, here's why it's interesting, here's what surprised us, here's where, so the first part really is like, actually, there's a hilarious anecdote. My mom and dad went out and downloaded the ebook right away and started going through it, which is, they're mathematically, they're significantly older than me, and I'm not young. It was awesome that they downloaded the ebook, but the very first thing my mom asked is, did you read your book? And I just laughed because, she's reading it going, some of this is a little bit repetitive. Some of this feels a little bit bland, or like, it's repeating information, but it's not telling a strong story. But of course, that was the idea. I wanted to test how homogenized is this. I pulled as much as I could out of it to make the content vary, but it was very, there's parts that were repetitive, parts that were sort of lowest common denominator, even though it was pulling up interesting facts. I learned a lot while I was watching ChatGPT answer my questions and write the book, because there were aspects of history of communication that I had not been aware of. So that was kind of amazing. But this risk that you asked about of homogenization is absolutely there. We like the path of least resistance. There's going to be a lot of content that's generated. Now, the nice thing is, I think one of the things that we've had that's been a challenge in social media is that people are like pushing things to extremes. Maybe a little bit of centrism via AI is not a bad thing in general, but it does really risk. I would hope that people take forms from ChatGPT and then add their own sort of flavor and story on top of it. But I realize that a lot of us are going to be generating bits and pieces that are genericized. The other thing that leads to, which really worries me even more in the short run, is it's going to just lead to the creation of huge volumes of writing. I mean, think about your inbox when everybody's generating daily variations on whatever it is, spam or just outreach marketing when it's all AI generated. We're going to be overwhelmed with content that is all hard to distinguish.
I used the analogy in a previous episode of ChatGPT being like the early days of Napster, like Napster 1999, where it was kind of fun and exciting to be able to get anything ever recorded in the world without really paying attention to, did you own it? Should you get it? Where does it come from? And a whole industry was spawned around what eventually got, regulated and enforced. And what is, let's say we're back in a year talking about the previous 12 months of innovation around LLMs. What does that industry that ChatGPT is going to spawn look like in 12 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking about some of the things that I think are likely to change in the technology, which is not exactly answering your question, but right now, ChatGPT knows about everything from 2021 back, right? And we all want to get ChatGPT's take. In fact, this is interesting. I've actually seen some online videos where people are saying, use ChatGPT to optimize your sales on Amazon, find out the latest trends in what's selling and this, that. I mean, that's wrong, right? ChatGPT doesn't know about the latest trends. So from the point of view of what's going to advance technologically, I think making it so that these technologies know about what's happening, are sort of know what's going on now and layer that in as a sort of almost like a short-term memory on top of the entire model of the history of language. It's a very interesting topic that there's going to be a need for facts and knowledge. In terms of the sort of framing of what industries are going to come out, I think one of the biggest ones is that there's going to be a bunch of, well, obviously they're already paid services, but customizations around points of view, like, who do I like listening to? Which bot do I like? And that's going to be a service that people are purchasing, like where you start to angle the story a little bit more toward a particular bias, which is very interesting and kind of also disconcerting. In terms of regulation, certainly there's going to be people developing tooling that looks for, you can purchase my service to ensure that people aren't writing content with ChatGPT. I've seen that already. You can purchase my service to look for risk of plagiarism in your output, like just filters. I can imagine a whole industry of filters sort of operating around it. And of course, I have no idea what regulation is going to do. My fear is that regulators will jump before they understand, but there will need to be some regulation as well.
So this podcast is about AI and the future of work. So question for you, you're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of students who are going to be entering a world of work where LLMs are ubiquitous. What are the kinds of skills that they should be investing in now that will lead to careers that we can't even imagine right now, but that will kind of transcend a workplace where LLMs are ubiquitous?
That's a great question. So one of the terms that I'm hearing all over the place right now is prompt engineering. So that is really not just, that part of it is just very applied. Like, how do you get a large language model to generate the specific output you need? But there is actually a lot of technical content to it. Some of the applications that I've seen where you're defining the inputs and the examples and the questions to narrow down the space so that your outputs really match the world that you live in and are sort of expert in your area. That's very technical, actually. And so it's a mix of some new skills around how do you write these prompts, how do these systems work, So that in itself is going to become an area of expertise. I think there's going to be a really interesting confluence of data science and machine learning and these other things. So there's going to be data scientists who are great at feeding their models, their more traditional models. And, I loved what you said about AI helping people. I've always said that AI should stand for augmented intelligence. And so big fan of that. And I've written a little bit online about that myself, but they're going to be taking these models which solve very nasty little problems that people don't like to do. Read through this stack of 1,000 sheets to find these 3 references to X and then enter those into a database. Those types of activities happen in law, they happen in medicine. They're horrible for humans, but they're great for AI. So how do you say, okay, well, great. So I'm going to get really good at feeding some of those pieces of text into the into ChatGPT, and then using that as input to my models for that augmented intelligence. And frankly, I've seen some really interesting applications of generating the AI and machine learning code with the ChatGPT. So you're sort of, or with GPT-3 more specifically, but that confluence I think is going to be a big one. People who are expert at sort of connecting the dots between large language models and machine learning and other sort of technical areas. I mean, for me, those are the things I see coming. Certainly there's a lot, because all roles are going to need to shift a little bit. Someone told me the other day, it was someone who's in a writing field. They said, I don't think I'm going to be replaced by AI, but I'm at risk for being replaced by someone who's using AI well. So that using AI well is what we've got to master.
That's a very interesting statement. So we've done almost 200 episodes of this podcast, and we rarely get to talk to a guest with as much experience, throughout the history of AI and the rise of neural nets. So before I can let you off the hot seat, you gotta answer this one for me. Just genuinely curious to get your reaction. So you lived through what we call the AI winter, you mentioned, and then the subsequent, whether we call it a spring, a summer, et cetera, the current AI euphoria. Is this temporary? Is there another AI winter ahead, or how is this period different from kind of the emergence of the spring or the summer, with the rise of deep neural nets?
I think I do think that it's different. I mean, it depends on what you define by a winner, but if we're looking for true artificial general intelligence, AGI, the stuff that's going to lead to Terminator and Skynet, and if we think that's what's coming immediately, I think that could still be a ways off. So there could be a winner there for people who are looking for the AGI breakthrough. There might be a winner there. However, it would be more like a mild thaw, not a full winter, because what happened when I was doing neural nets in '93, for example, we solved some problems, but we had to engineer those problems very carefully to be able to solve them. I mean, I have a really interesting story about finding objects in images of sky images and recognizing which ones we should go back and look at with a telescope. We were able to solve that with a neural network back then, but it took weeks and weeks and weeks to do something that now would probably take about an hour, and the whole hour was just setting up the problem. The coding, the actual optimization would happen very quickly. So it quickly got to solving practical problems broadly, ran into major computing issues and major data access issues. Today, data access is really just has exploded. Our ability to scale compute, both through GPU, but also distributed computing and just the access to cloud computing has changed all that. And we've got solutions which we can use every day as we march toward this next step function. So it's not going to be a winner in that sense. I don't think there's a winner. I think we're we have real practical ways to use AI today. Every organization I talk to is looking for ways to get better with data so that they can feed the right data, have the right people, as you said, the right employees. I mean, in supply chain, for example, the people I talk to, they're trying to figure out who in planning and supply chain can we get that has the technical chops to run the organization in a new digitized way. And in fact, just one quick anecdote. I sat in a really interesting conference in Berlin about supply chain in consumer packaged goods, and Unilever was partnering with McLaren, so that's the Formula One racing team, and the model had changed from you're in Formula One. It used to be a pit boss who was sort of making all the calls about the race. Now there's some nerd like me in the background receiving all these feeds from all these tools and then providing insights to the pit boss. But that flow is changing, and they were seeing that same thing happening in supply chain as well. So everyone's trying to figure out how to put data and analytics first. So I don't think there's a winner, although it still could be a while before that next step function. In the meantime, what we humans interpret as intelligence, I mean, ChatGPT does seem pretty smart. Like it can pass tests, and so it's I think we're on a more of a continuous climb now rather than step functions and winters.
You mentioned AGI, artificial general intelligence. Is that the right goal? And if so, do you want to prognosticate when it's going to happen? And if not, why are we so fixated on it?
I think we're fixated on it because it's existential, and it's like a crazy. I mean, in fact, again, going back to this, the evolution of creativity and communication. What originally prompted me to start to really sit down and try to write a book with ChatGPT was that I've written these previous books on AI. Am I out of business? Like, am I just done? Am I irrelevant now? And, I found, okay, I'm not irrelevant yet, so that's happy. But, 90% of what I did previously, ChatGPT actually did a pretty nice job. So I think we're very fascinated with existential questions, and that's where that comes from. Yeah, my inclination in life is generally to try and find solutions to problems, and so that's a different thing. Like that's moving the technologies we have today into more and more instrumented sets of capabilities and more nuance captured in those things so that they can cover more and more use cases.
Bob, it feels like we're just getting started. This is a lot of fun, but
thank you.
We got to wrap up for this episode. Would you come back and continue this conversation sometime?
I would absolutely love to.
All right, this has been great.
Good.
Bob, where can the audience learn more about you and OII and, of course, the book?
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon. It is also published through booksellers, through other sources. So it's ChatGPT, an AI expert, and a lawyer walk into a bar. The evolution of creativity and communication. Can find it through various searches on Amazon. I'm at OII.ai. That's our website. We're on LinkedIn. You can find us there as well. And I'm Bob at OII.ai. And honestly, I love to have people reach out to me directly, as long as they're not trying to sell too much. Love to have these conversations with folks that hear about what we're doing and want to talk about it more.
Bob, we are all rooting for you to succeed. This is so much fun. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, that's a wrap for this week on AI and the Future of Work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.